Rome began with a murder. The greatest empire in history was founded on betrayal, not order. Its first law wasn't justice, it was blood spilled by a brother's hand. Picture this: a city born not from law or order, but from a single, brutal act of betrayal. A civilization that would one day rule the known world, founded on a foundation of blood. This isn't the opening to a fantasy novel. This is the shocking, untold story of Rome's very first day. Forget everything you think you know about the glorious founding of the Eternal City. The statues, the grand architecture, the tales of noble senators, it all started with a lie. A lie that has been carefully polished for over 2,000 years. Today we're going to peel back the layers of myth and propaganda to reveal the dark, violent truth that lies at the heart of the Roman Empire. The truth about two brothers, destined for greatness, who became mortal enemies. What really happened on that fateful day on the Palatine Hill? The answer is more shocking than you can imagine. To understand this story, we have to travel back in time, not just to the founding of Rome, but even further, to the ashes of another great city, Troy. According to the Roman poet Virgil, the story of Rome begins with a Trojan hero named Aeneas. After his city was sacked by the Greeks, Aeneas escaped, carrying his elderly father on his shoulders and leading his young son by the hand. He was a refugee, a survivor of a brutal war, tasked by the gods with a monumental destiny, to find a new home for his people in Italy. After years of wandering the Mediterranean, facing monsters, storms, and the wrath of goddesses, Aeneas finally landed on the shores of Latium in central Italy. There, he and his followers clashed with the local tribes, but eventually established a new lineage. Generations later, this heroic bloodline led to a king named Numitor, who ruled the city of Alba Longa. Numitor was a good king, but his reign was cut short by his ambitious and ruthless younger brother Emulius. In a classic tale of sibling rivalry turned deadly, Emulius seized the throne, killed Numitor's sons, forced Numitor's only daughter, Rhea Silvia, to become a Vestal virgin. This was a cold, calculated move. Vestal virgins were sworn to a 30-year vow of celibacy. By forcing her into this role, Aemilius ensured that Numitor would have no legitimate heirs to challenge his stolen crown. His plan seemed foolproof. But destiny, as it often does, had other plans. One day, according to the legend, Rhea Silvia was visited by the god of war himself, Mars. From this divine encounter, she conceived and gave birth to twin boys. These were no ordinary children. They were demigods, sons of a king and a god. Their names were Romulus and Remus. When King Amulius discovered the existence of the twins, he was furious. These boys were a direct threat to his power. He couldn't risk letting them live, but killing his own great-nephews outright was a messy affair that could anger the gods. So, he ordered a servant to take the infants to the Tiber River and leave them to drown. It was a sentence of death, disguised as an act of fate. The servant, however, took pity on the helpless babies. Instead of throwing them into the raging river, he placed them in a basket and set it gently afloat. The river was in flood, and the current carried the basket safely to the shore, where it came to rest at the base of a fig tree. And here, one of the most famous parts of the legend unfolds. The cries of the infants attracted a she-wolf, but instead of harming them, this wolf, an animal sacred to Mars, their divine father, miraculously nurtured them. Soon after, a woodpecker, another animal sacred to Mars, brought them bits of food. She licked them clean and let them suckle alongside her own pups. For the Romans, this wasn't just a fairy tale, it was a powerful symbol. Their founders were so special, so divinely favored, that even the wild beasts of the forest recognized their greatness and protected them. Eventually, the twins were discovered by a shepherd named Faustulus. He and his wife Laurentia took the boys in and raised them as their own. Growing up among the shepherds on the hills of Latium, Romulus and Remus became strong, charismatic, and natural leaders. They were tough, quick-witted, and fearless, often leading the other young shepherds in fights against rival groups or in hunts for predators. They were protectors of the weak, champions of the common folk. They had no idea of their royal blood, but leadership was clearly in their veins. As young men, their reputation for bravery grew, but it also got them into trouble. One day, during a dispute between their shepherds, and the shepherds of the deposed King Numitor, Remus was captured and taken to Alba Longa to face justice. He was brought before none other than his own grandfather Numida, though neither of them knew it. Meanwhile, Faustulus, the shepherd who had raised them, finally decided the time was right to reveal the truth to Romulus. He told him the story of the basket, the she-wolf, and their secret royal heritage. Suddenly, everything made sense. Romulus, filled with a new sense of purpose, gathered his band of shepherds and marched on Alba Longa to rescue his brother. Back in the city, Numitor was questioning Remus. Struck by the young man's noble bearing and fearless attitude, he began to ask about his past. When he heard Remus's story and saw how his age matched the timeline of his long-lost grandsons, he began to put the pieces together. At that very moment, Romulus and his forces stormed the city. They fought their way to the palace, killed the usurper King Amulius, and restored their grandfather Numitor to his rightful throne. The long-lost princes had returned. Justice was served. It's a happy ending, right? This is where the story takes its dark turn. This is where the foundation of Rome is truly laid. Wrong with their grandfather back on the throne of Alba Longa, Romulus and Remus decided they didn't want to simply wait for their inheritance. They were leaders, born and bred. They wanted to build their own city. They returned to the place where they had been saved by the she-wolf, the 7 hills near the Tiber River. But a problem immediately arose. Who would be king of this new city? They were twins, equal in age and ambition. They couldn't decide. So they agreed to let the gods choose through augury, the practice of interpreting omens from the flight of birds. Remus went to the Aventine Hill, while Romulus went to the Palatine Hill. It was a sacred contest. Remus was the first to see an omen. 6 vultures flew over his head. He declared himself the winner and sent a message to his brother. But just as the message arrived, an even more powerful omen appeared to Romulus. 12 vultures. The argument began immediately. Remus claimed victory because he saw the birds first. Romulus claimed victory because he saw more birds. The sign was ambiguous. The gods had not given a clear answer, and the brothers' ambition quickly curdled into resentment and suspicion. The bond that had survived a king's wrath and a wild upbringing was about to break. Here, the historical accounts diverge slightly, but they all end in tragedy. In the most common version of the story, Romulus, confident in his divine right, began to mark out the sacred boundary of his new city on the Palatine Hill. He yoked a bull and a cow to a plow and carved a furrow in the earth, the Pomerium, which would serve as the city's future walls. He declared that anyone who crossed this sacred line without permission would be killed. Remus, still bitter and resentful from the augury contest, watched from a distance. In a fatal act of mockery and defiance, he jumped over the freshly plowed furrow, taunting his brother and belittling his new wall. "Is this what you'll protect your city with?" he sneered. For Romulus, this was the ultimate betrayal. It wasn't just a childish prank. It was a violation of a sacred right, a public challenge to his authority, and a terrible omen for the future security of his city. In a flash of rage, Romulus struck his brother down. Some say he used his sword, others say a shovel. The weapon doesn't matter. The result was the same. Remus, his twin, his other half, lay dead at his feet. The first act in the history of Rome was not a debate in the Senate or the writing of a law. It was fratricide. The city's sacred wall was consecrated with a brother's blood. Romulus stood over Remus's body and declared, "So shall it be for all who dare to cross my walls." It was a chilling declaration. The message was clear. The security of the state, the authority of its ruler, was absolute, and would be defended with lethal force. Romulus was now the sole founder and first king of the city he named after himself, Rome. But he was a king who began his reign with a terrible crime, mourned his brother, but the deed was done. The city was founded, but at what cost? This violent beginning would echo throughout Rome's history. The Republic would be torn apart by civil wars between powerful men who saw themselves as new Romuluses. Emperors would seize power through violence and purge their rivals without a second thought. The story of Romulus and Remus wasn't just a founding myth. It was Rome's original sin, a blueprint for its future greatness and its ultimate downfall. The city of laws was born from lawlessness. The empire of order was founded on chaos. And the story of two brothers, raised by a wolf and torn apart by ambition, serves as a timeless, brutal reminder that power once tasted can corrupt even the strongest of bonds. Thanks for watching. If you found this dive into the dark side of history as fascinating as I did, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more stories that challenge everything you thought you knew. See you next time.